people to help them develop and forward, then they all got to go out and actually do the activity. 45 minutes after that transition started, and it's sad for kids. So, Robert, do we have any questions that we could need to be answered?
Yes. My first question would be, how can I prepare youth for smooth transitions?
And I'd like to say before we get going that this defines things too, because in its simplest terms, it's closing down of one activity and opening up a second activity. And so, Robert, we're getting a real bad echo, by the way. And I'd like to say before we get going that this define those in this terms, and then we can talk about
That's a people to people transition. Another one is what you mentioned was an activity to an activity. And so we're shedding this activity And they will come all kinds of things. They will advise you.
There's going to be potentially people walking there, right? Which could completely disrupt the transition, so to speak. So you're looking. Really, technically speaking, how many little mini MINI transitions happen. So I'm just going to go through a quick scenario. So let's say that you were in a classroom and you wanted to stop the math of what they were doing. Let's say it was, math homework or something like that. And you truly needed to go out to PE. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to say, okay, everybody, this is the 30-second countdown. And you would have already given them some instruction based off of what they told you and you've told them, and you guys kind of work it out. So just want to let you know you're going to be, 30 seconds or in a minute, you're going to be stopping math, and then we're going to go to PE. So I want you to start thinking about those things. So then the next thing you're doing is, so you stop them. That's a transition. Then you're going to count them down from 30 seconds. So you get to about, let's say, where there's 10 seconds of the 30 seconds left. You're going to start, okay, we're at 10, making sure that they know already they're putting their stuff away, they're closing up, they're finishing the last letter or the addition, whatever it is that they're doing. Then what the next transition is, we're saying, okay, so how do we handle it from getting to our seats to dot dot dot, which is usually going to be lining up at the door. Okay, great. And as they're walking there, we're talking with them, making sure that the agreements that they came up to begin with, that they're going to walk, the hands are going to be, to themselves. They're going to keep their eyes on the person's head in front of them. Well, then we transition again just to outside, which is traditionally a line. Now, I'm not a big line guy. I'm just saying what most people do. So then we're transitioning. Now we've got to watch out the other environment. We got to watch out for dogs. We got to watch out for people. We've got to watch out for the environment as far as maybe it was wet, somebody spilled some, right? So you have all of these things. Then we're going to transition to the actual field to do the PE situation. Then we're going to transition, right? I think you get the point. Transition, 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 transition. So I always tell people, if I were to start with somebody, um, if I go meet with a group of 30 or 50 or 10,000, I would probably want to start with transitions because it just happens so many times throughout a day.
That is so true. When you were going through that scenario, I was thinking about myself today. and I was just by myself. I only had to transition me. It's not like I had to transition a group. And yet I found myself starting a transition and then thinking, oh, well, maybe I need to pivot and go this direction and then pivot back. And I think that it's no wonder that transitions can be challenging, right? Because it's hard when the only person that we're working with is us, because it happens so many times in a day. So thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that, because it's a zillion and two, I think. So I think that really kind of covers how to make those smooth, and so that everybody feels good about the transition you made. So Robert, do we have another question? Ooh, make sure that everybody else is gone. No, which of course doesn't work. So Brett, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think first again, define it, define it with, especially when you're working with kids, just simply tell them we're closing down one activity and we're starting another. So that doesn't mean that you can just go from zero to hero, but that means start to wind down whatever it is that you're doing and start to think about the things that are going to be important for the transition. And then also maybe a couple things on where you're going to be able to go. So that's number one. Number two, have a routine, right? Keep a routine, something that is a go to every single time. So if what you do is you give them a minute and say, hey, we have a minute and we're going to transition from this activity. And I always tell them the next activity, start to be able to think about those things. And then if we do a 10-second countdown, right? And then what's the routine that they have? They're going to get up, they're going to push in their chairs, they're going to go line up, whatever that routine is, because as we all know, habits are a big deal. And then the other thing that I would say there, twofold. One, always have a student leader, somebody that can really help them during these transitions and be able to help you as well. You have two eyes, and there's usually 20 bodies in there. There's a lot going on, so you can have a leader or student leader that can help you. And then the other thing that I really like, which would be one of my favorite trade tricks, is to do some sort of a countdown during the process as well. So we would ask them, how long, do you think it should take you to get from here to here? And they say 10, 20, 30, whatever they're going to say as far as seconds. And then you go, okay, we're all in agreement at ... Let's say it's 15 seconds. And then what you do, if you see some stragglers, you're able to, okay, we're at 5, we're at 3. And so everybody kind of quickens up the pace.
I like that. And I think countdowns are important. And if you're not a countdown person, you could do something with a clap, right? Clapping for kids, or music on, music off, right? Do something that fits your personality, but there has to be cues. And I could not agree more about the routine, right? You do not want to have to go every time, push in your chairs, stand behind, right? Whatever that is, you want that routine so ingrained in them that that's how they do business. It's not something that you have to reiterate every time. So I do think that's helpful. So anything else, Robert? Another question?
Before he goes to the next question, the other thing that I think too is if you just have a one go-to way of transitions, a lot of times we try to get fancy, right? We go, oh, we need 47 ways to do one thing. And it's like, no, that actually is going to hurt you with kids. They need that routine. They need that habit. And so maybe you want to change it 3 times a year, but you don't want to change it regularly, and you don't want it to be, the opening looks like this and the close looks like this and this looks like, it's kind of like an attention getter. You need a singular attention getter that can really get their attention right away for safety purposes. So that would be the last thing I would say.
I think that's a really good point. And I think we sometimes do try and we clever our way out of having routine, right? Kids don't know what to expect. Yeah, that's for sure. Okay, so Robert, do we have another question? had the opportunity to witness an absolutely amazing transition for a young person with special needs. And we were outside and we were observing and we were outdoors, and they were coming in off of the playing field. And this child was very agitated by the things that had happened on the playing field that he really felt like were not right. He felt like that kids had not followed the rules and the guidelines. And one of the things that they were able to do with him, and they had done it in the past, so he was able to implement it on his own, was he had a calm down routine. So there was a routine so that he could collect himself so that he could continue and make the transition back to the classroom. And it took him about 5 minutes, but you could see him talking himself through this routine that they had developed so that he could transition from one space to another successfully and leave behind whatever was agitating or uncomfortable to him in the setting. So I think that with kids with special need, routine is even more important, but maybe you need a routine on top of a routine, because there may be a part that's really troublesome for them, that it just doesn't feel right to them. And so what is their routine so that they can get themselves to settle down or to make the transition? So I think it would be both, and a routine for everybody and then an individualized routine that works for them. I think that would be helpful. So I'll kick that to you, Brad, as well, because I know you used to work with special ed kids.
Yeah, that was my first classroom, 16 special day kids. And even in there, so let's say that you're, in this case, maybe they're talking about a special needs kid in a mainstream situation. But either direction, if it was even a complete class full of special day kids, I think that the first thing is that I would start them early, right? So if I knew that there was a minute countdown for the transitions for everybody else, I would go to them and I would, we would have like a little handshake or a tap on the shoulder, that would be 3 taps or something like that, to where they knew that initiated in their mind, hey, we're getting ready to transition. So kind of a pre-transition to the actual transition. The second thing that I did was that I would put the cool kids, so to speak, whatever that means, but I would put them as a buddy situation to be able to help them along. Thirdly, what I would do is I would have the class, especially in a mainstream situation, is really do praising as that particular kid is transitioning correctly, so that it's not just coming from the teacher or the person that's in charge, so to speak, that it would also be coming from a group. And that really caught on really well when you hear 10 different or 12 different people saying, nice, Johnny, I like the way. And we used to, we talked about that last week. We tried not to do gross and gratuitous praise, but very specific. Oh, Johnny, I like the way that you push in your chair. Oh, Johnny, I like the way that you're walking over. Johnny, I like the way that your hands are there. Or just a nice job if it has to be gross and gratuitous. But those would be the 3 things that I would add to the party. And I didn't hear the first 30 seconds of what you said, so hopefully it was none of that as a duplicate.
I don't know, it wasn't. And I think that routine is important for everyone. And I think it is sometimes more important for some kids than others, right? For some kids really, really need to know this step, then this step, then next step, then the next step. And I think that that's important for us no matter what the kids are. And I know that we've talked about the importance of routine, right, in managing transitions and how important that is. But a question that, well, I think that you answered, but maybe you want to elaborate on it. I really liked how you talked about the cues that you gave to kids, whether that was a high five or a pat on the shoulder or 3 taps. Can you talk more about that, why you chose those physical reminders so that they could prepare themselves to get ready for routine, whether that's a special day kid or any kid, right?
Yeah, so I mean, let's call it like it is, right? A trigger is a trigger is a trigger. And so nowadays, back in the day, we didn't have, we barely had flip phones, right? We had the long walkie-talkie type things or whatever. But now, just like as an example, getting ready for Doctors and Coaches Corner, I have a trigger that my phone alarm goes off, right? So triggers are critically important. Why do you think Post-its have made so much money? Those are really triggers or reminders of the things that you have to do. And as you know, I mean, if there's 1,000 or 10,000 transitions that are going on in a day, what are all of those triggers that need to happen? I have a whiteboard. I have my Post-its. I have my own task and to-do list. I have my phone. I have all of these different things. And so now the technology is better for triggers. So back then we didn't have all of that. So we would do triggers, different ways by a touch, or maybe sometimes a color, or a countdown is a trigger, or a buddy that would nudge them and say, "Hey, we're getting ready to transition, or transition now." So I just think that we all need triggers, and it just depends on what you can help to set up for them. But ultimately, what you want is for them to set them up themselves for independent purposes, right? You want them to be independent. And so by the end, even with the special day kids, they knew what was going on. I didn't have to say a word. Or I remember when I was coaching a lot of the athletic teams, I'm like, wake me up at halftime when we're up by 20, because you guys know what you have to do. Now, I said, if it's a very important game, maybe I'll stay up the whole time. But otherwise, I know you're going to be up by 20. You guys do your thing.
Yeah, that's true. I think that's very helpful. So I just have a question that I'd like to ask you too. Sometimes kids are resistant to changing. I'm not finished with this. I want to finish it. If I could just get this done, just hold on, right? And so I would think that I think that's true of it. That's true of me. So I don't think that I'm the Lone Ranger on that. So what are some strategies, Brett, that you've used to help those kids who just want 5 more minutes, right? I just need 3 more minutes. What are some things that you found particularly helpful for them?
Yeah, so I'm not a big let's make a deal fan, but why not, right? I mean, to me, one of the greatest skills that we can learn, which most people will disagree with me, is sales. And part of sales is negotiation. And so I used to always, use it more for a negotiation tactic to teach them how to negotiate more time, more so than the more time. Because in the end, what's an extra 3 minutes on either side? If you don't build that in as the child champion or the adult, I would go, shame on you, right? We need to build those things in anyway. But I just used to like to use that for to teach them how to negotiate. So instead of them throwing a temper tantrum, we're like, whoa, 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 what is it that you want? We call it state the objective. So they would state the objective. Well, I want more time. Okay. So what are you doing currently? Well, I'm whining and crying and to get more time. And how's that going to work for you with me? And they go, that's not going to work at all. So then why would you do that? What you're trying to do is to be effective. What would be effective? Well, I would state the objective. And I go, okay, what's your objective? Well, I want more time. Then state your objective. And then we can negotiate that through, and I could teach them, because like I always say, the reason I think sales skills are the most important is one of 2 things are going to happen in your life. You're either going to sell somebody on why they should, or they're going to sell you on why they shouldn't. And if you want to talk about a 7-year-old kid who I've seen many a times sell their parents on why they should stay up past 9 o'clock, and instead of the parents selling them on why they're going to bed, I would say that's not good negotiation tactics.
Right. I'm so glad that you said that, because I was going to ask you to share that, because I think that's such an interesting insight. Because I think a lot of times the idea of sales is not positive for people. And they say, I don't want to be a salesperson. I don't want to do that. And yet every day we do that. You either sell sell yourself that you're going to get up at 5 o'clock to do a task, or you sell yourself on why you're not going to get up at 5 o'clock to do the task, right? So it's not that it's not always about selling someone else, but you sell yourself constantly, right? So I know I need to do that, and I am masterful at this. I really know I need to do that, but I'm going to sell myself on why I should do that tomorrow instead of today. And so I think that when you understand those kinds of things, teaching kids how to negotiate, even if who they're negotiating with is themselves, I think that that's a life skill, and life skills are as important, if not more important, than an academic skill. An academic skill can be applied to your life skills, but life skills are huge.
Well, like we say, and you know this, I think I even got this from you, being my boss for 100 years. This is the practicing ground for the real world, right? So we're adults. we don't get to practice much. We're just in the real world. But for these little guys especially, it is the practicing ground for the real world. And if you think that's one of the most important skills, which it is, again, whether you're negotiating with yourself or others, and think about the great teachers. They're influencers, the great leaders. They influence people to learn that 1 + 1 = 2, or that ... or whatever it is. So I think that a lot of times we sell sales as a negative word, but the greatest teachers are the best salespeople or influencers.
Absolutely. No, for sure. So Robert, I know we talked about a lot of things that people might have had questions about. Are there any questions that we haven't touched on that people have asked? Okay, I think probably we've talked a lot about that. I just think that it's essential. When you have a routine, it becomes the way you do business. And once you've mastered the way you do business, then I think that transitions and everything else you do is much easier. Do you want to add any final thoughts to that, Brett?
No, I just think it's predictability, right? I mean, if you have a routine, it's predictable what's going to happen, all things being equal, because you've done it so many times. You know, Robert and I talk about habits all the time, right? And if we didn't learn these habits in school or from our parents, whether it's about, you know, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, let's talk about, as an example, money, right? Most people say, save your money. And I say, the Kimbé Natumbo, like my wife says to me often, we don't want to save our money. We want to invest our money. Because if we're saving our so the first habit is to do nothing. That's terrible, right? So then the next habit is everybody says, save your money. I think we need to twist that word to invest your money. Because if you're saving your money, even at 4 or 5%, which is the max you're going to get in the bank account right this second, you're still going backwards at 10%. But if you can invest your money and it's coming down at us at, 9, 10, whatever the number is, I say it's 14, but whatever, then you've got to be able to get your money to do better than that. So ability matters. I think efficiency, right? So if you think about it, it's like building Legos, right? So people don't understand, like the attention getter. Well, that's because I need to be in control. I said, no, you need to be in charge. And you need to be in charge in case of an emergency situation. Well, it's the same thing with transitions. If you're transitioning from your seat to the outside, right, and there's an earthquake situation, that's an emergency. So you're going to be able to transition a lot quicker if you have all these transitions that you've been practicing over and over. And then the last thing is it promotes independence, right? Once you get this thing going, you don't have to sit there and babysit them and tell them to do this and move with your left hand and right hand and push your chair in and do your desk. No, you pre-established that as part of the routine. So those are the only 3 things that I want to not add, but just emphasize.
Well, and one of the things that you were talking about that really reminded me of something that we talk about often is the difference between directing and telling, and helping kids understand by asking questions and giving them the responsibility. Because to me, If you're going to direct and tell somebody how to do something, you're going to say, don't do it with your right hand, do it with your left hand, open the door, walk 5 steps, push in the chair, and you do all that. To me, what you're saying to them is, I am willing to have you attached to me as an appendage for the rest of my life, because I know better what you need to do than you could ever figure out on your own. And I think that I don't think any grown-up, even if you're a parent, want your child attached to you for the rest of your natural life, right? You are them understand from dependence on you to independence, so they can do it on their own, to interdependence, so they can do it as a group, right? That's the path. And too often what we do is we stop with directing and telling, or we get them to the point of independence. And so in a large group, everybody wants to act on their own, and that's not going to be a very successful transition, right? So I know, Brett, that you've had the opportunity to work with small groups, but I know that you've also worked with groups of, like, I don't know, 100 kids at a time, when there were a couple of you out for PE in wide open spaces. So do you have thoughts around, are there adjustments? Obviously they would be, but what are those adjustments that you make to a really large group, especially one in wide open space?
Yeah, so first of all, I wish there were, like, I was trying to give you thumbs up and emojis, and apparently they don't have that on this. Maybe that's something that they can do on the live streams, because I really liked everything that you were saying. So I guess I could have just done it like this and whatever. I didn't want to be too distracting. But anyway, so yes and no. So it's the same conceptually, right? So I used to draw on the board with my special day kids, and I would say, okay, there's 4 divided into 4, right? And I said, okay, what are the 4-step process? Because what I wanted to teach them was about the process. I said, I'll do the math. You just tell me what the process was. And so what we would do is we would go through that 4-step process, and I would do the math for them. And at the end, I'd say, okay, now I want to do this one. And I put 4, and I put 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, like 100 fours. And I would say, okay, is this more difficult? And they'd go, oh, wow, way more difficult. I said, really? I don't think it's more difficult. I think it's just going to take longer. And they'd be like, what do you mean? I said, well, I don't know. What are the 4 steps? And so we would go through the 4 steps, and then we get down to the bottom. And then I go, now what do you do? They go, well, we just do 4 steps again. Exactly. So I think that what you have to be able to do is set the tone, and you can do that with small groups at first, right? To be able to say, but it's the same thing. It'll be a similar countdown or whatever. So if you need to, I didn't need to, right? Because I just had what I would call presence with my kids, right? So I didn't need to do that. But if you needed to, you could do 10 at a time. And if I did that, I would grab, you know, the kid that was most likely to be able to lead that group correctly, right? Maybe it was the biggest kid in the whole class. No, it just would be whoever that was. And I'd say, this is your group of 10. Here are the instructions. Next group of 10, so on and so forth. And so then they would practice, right? Just like with emergency drills, right? So we had 450 kids in my after school program when I first started, all in the cafeteria, right? So we practiced if there was a fire drill or earthquake or whatever. And we just did it over and over and over again until they go, I'm tired of doing it. I said, great, do it correctly. You only have to do it once. And then they would get it, right? Because it starts with that mindset. And then we do structured, what I call structured schematics, the schemes, right? And then the players will just fit into that.
Right, right. And, you know, I like this idea that it's not that you're changing the process. You're just going to take longer at the process, right? And I think that young people can understand that. And then I think you can also have the conversation with them about, okay, how much time, what do you think our best time could be? How do we get there? And then make adjustments. And I think that what happens is that as adults, it's pretty clear. You can go, oh yeah, if we just did this, this, and this, it would go much smoother. And so what we do is we try to impose our thoughts on them. And if we can, and it's not that you can't ever add anything, but you've got to help them figure out what's the this, and this, because it will be far more effective. Kids will agree with kids 1,000 times quicker than they'll agree with you as an adult, in my opinion, right? And they like that autonomy. And ultimately, in my opinion, the goal of any sort of person that is working with kids, a child champion, is to help the child develop agency, the ability to understand and practice that the choices they make will have a direct impact on the outcomes they receive. And that to me is certainly a lesson that adults need to learn. But when we're preparing, we're not preparing an 8-year-old to be 8. You only get to be 8 for 365 days. It doesn't last very long. What we're preparing children to do from the time they're born until we believe that they're mature enough to be an adult is how to do this adult thing, how to accept the responsibility for your own stuff, right? And certainly, I am an old adult, and I don't always do that, right? But it's not that you're not working with kids so that they can be not just 8, but they can practice the adult part of that, which they'll get to do for 50, 60 years. And I think that transitions and understanding them, because they are just so prevalent, is hugely important. I think it's truly a life skill to be able to wrap something up and move to something next, and to do that effectively. So, Robert, are there any other questions that people have posed? I know that I kind of wonder about unexpected things, but I don't know. Let's see what others want to ask. Yeah, I feel like we've talked through some of those ways, but to intentionally do that, I think that you have to invite them to set the standards, to define what needs to be done, and then to be able to assess how well they did. Because when you set the standard and you say, we're going to do this, and then this, and then this, you have the routine set. Then the question becomes, how well did we do the routine? Or did we just say that we wanted to do the routine and we didn't do it at all? So I think that to help them and to give them that ownership, we can contribute to the plan, and then we can help without telling them. We can help them come up with the plan. And if they've missed something that is critically important, we can throw it in. But otherwise, we're going to let them go with their plan. But then I think they have to assess how well they did and decide whether, if they think they were perfect, then let's continue exactly what we did. If they think there is something that they're not doing well, then they need to come up with the pivot. They need to say, I think this would work better. Then you try it. And if it worked better, yahoo, you've got a new part of your routine. And if it doesn't work better, you go back to the drawing board and you pivot again. So Brett, what would you like to add to that?
Yeah, just basically, kind of piggybacking on what you said, involvement, right? So if you have a team leader, if you have somebody that's doing the timer, you should have somebody eventually that will be the countdowner, so to speak, all those types of different things. And then we used to just do a rating system from 0.0 being low to 10.0 being high. And so if they were at their desk for some certain reason, and they could write it down, and I wanted them to be very specific, 7.5. But if they were already standing up and they didn't have anything to write with, they could say that they felt like that was a 9 or an 8 or a 7. And everybody would look around. And if there was a 2-point deviation, then we had that as a discussion. So I used to partner them up. Why are some people saying it's a 5 and the other people are saying it's an 8? Now, if there's 7 and 8s, all of them, then we don't really talk about it and we move on. But we can always just partner them up and say, what would you do differently, or why do you think the discrepancy was? And then it would come out. Somebody would say, oh, it's because we weren't very fast. We barely hit our number at 15 seconds. Or somebody else will say, oh, well, our hands weren't to ourselves, or whatever the ... is, right? And again, you only have, 2 eyes, and there's 20 of them, or 25, or in my case, there was 150 of them, like you said, in PE class. So there's no way that 2 eyes are going to be able to see all of that, even in the perfect world of line of sight and whatnot. You're just not going to be able to. I'm not a Tesla car. I can't see the 4,000 data points, but we would just do that. And then we would start breaking it down if what they wanted, because some classes would tell me at the beginning, we only want to be an 8. Okay, great. 8's good enough for me. I thought anything that was 7 or better, right? But I also could go the other direction. Like when I was coaching after school for like serious sports, I would say, this is the expectation. If you don't want to be up here at a 10, I'm not the coach for you, because that's the only way I know how to coach, right? And so I'll go find you another coach. But it's a classroom. It's a classroom situation. We always think, oh, everything's got to be a 10. Not really. Number one, that's near to impossible. And number two, where do you go from there, right? We always like to be able to move if that's what the group decides. And so some were happy with the 7. Some other competitive groups were, wanting to be 10 during transitions, and they would want to talk about it, right? The same ones that wanted to play whatever that's called, rock, paper, scissors, if there was a tie at first base or something. So I just think that, you got to understand the big parameters of transitions, but also understand who you're working with and what are their capabilities. Whereas others maybe never wanted to get to a 10 to begin with, but they can get to a 7 on day one. So I just think it's really involving them from start to finish in everything in regards to what it is that they're trying to accomplish.
Absolutely. And I think that I think that key in what you said was the very last words, in what they want to accomplish, right? Because you can impose your will upon them, and what you will get at best is a reluctant participant, right? And you will have feet dragging, and they're not going to be too engaged. And I think too that one of the things that's really, really important, I think that sometimes we don't let kids know what the flow of the day is going to be. We don't share an agenda with them. And so maybe the first thing that's on the docket that they're going to do is not something they're not interested in at all, right? They could care less about it. And yet 3 items down is the thing they care about the most. And so I think that one of the things that we can do to, even with a large group or a small group, that will help kids with the transition is to show them the agenda for the day. This is what we hope to accomplish today. It's not a promise, but it's our hope. And this is what we want to accomplish. And then I think it's important when you do that to ask them, do you agree with this agenda? And if you agree with it just like it's written, put your thumbs up. Now, I don't think you get to kids to say, no, I don't like it at all, but they could put their thumbs down, and you could ask them, what would you like for me to add to this agenda that would make the day better for you? And sometimes they'll tell you they're concerned about something that is bothering them, or maybe they just want to share something really exciting, right? But when you do that, I think that you set kids up for knowing that we need to transition quickly if we're going to get to the thing that I most care about. And I think that that's one of the ways that you can set yourself up and kids up for success is by letting them know we're going to make 9,000 transitions, but here's the one that probably is the one that floats your boat that you like the best.
Well, I think too that I know I used to say with the middle school kids, we lived in a rough crimed area. The street that was just over from the middle school was the highest crimed area in our town at one time. And so we had a lot of, gangbangers and different things of that nature. And we would tell them, when you're here, you're safe. We want to see you smile and have a great time and all of those things, right? Mm-hmm. But I said, make sure, just like a light switch, when you're getting ready to step out in transition to go back home, you better put that hardened face on. Because if they didn't, they would get beat up. They would get taken advantage of. And I know that we, had the same thing with when we were in South Central, right? And that was hard. Just that transition of going from, very hardened to being able to laugh and high five and goof. But you need to have an understanding of where you're at within the world, So, just like we used to tell the kids, hey, you can yell and scream all you want outside, but inside you need to use a voice that's, that's reasonable, right? Or in the cafeteria, maybe it's a little bit up, but not a lot up because it gets out of control. So I just think that transitions are so key to life. Whether you're transitioning from a bicycle to a car, whether you're, transitioning from the instructional day to the after school day, whether you're transitioning from your after school day to home, right? Because if when you go into your house, we don't know what those guys are dealing with there. It could be Shangri-La or it could be completely the opposite. So I think people need to understand how to transition into an environment for maximum success, for their maximum success.
And the environment, I think, really does matter a lot more than we think. I remember and I won't use his name, but you'll know who I'm talking about, that was at my school site when I was a principal. And he had lived in a very rough neighborhood in Los Angeles. And when I asked him about how often did he go down, to visit, because his mom still lived there, he said, I really try and get her to come up here. And I said, well, I know, but sometimes, you need to go there. And he said, yes, but he said, I have to get my mindset ready to go there because the way you behave is different. And I think that we need to understand that for kids. And that's why it's so, so important that the environment they are in with us is safe and supportive, and they have the opportunity to learn. But I think that you can't just ignore. So I know that one of the things we talk about with kids is one of the options you have is to walk away from a situation. And sometimes that's the very best thing you can do. And other times it's the very worst thing you can do. And I think that that's true with transitions as well, right? So I think your point was well taken, that it needs to be supportive, right, of their whole environment, not just the part that's with you.
Yeah, like I say, this is the practicing ground for the real world, right? So when I was very hard on my athletes, but we didn't talk about 8th grade basketball, for goodness sakes. We talked about life. And I said, what are you going to do when your electricity goes out? What about if you don't have enough money to pay for the formula for your child, right? We would talk about life stuff. And, just to share a quick, what we call touch point, I had a gal that called me, and this was like 10 years after middle school. And she goes, I hated you. And I said, well, get in line. I said, I was hard on you guys because I knew life would be hard, right? And she said she was one semester away from being a psychologist. And she said, I just kept hearing you saying, we don't quit. We never quit. We're going to keep moving forward. And she said, I just kept hearing that voice. And she said, I despised you in middle school, but I wanted to thank you as an adult. And I think to myself, you and I have both been very fortunate to have a lot of those phone calls which most teachers don't get. But the reality is that, sometimes we hug them when we should have nudged them, and other times we're nudging them when we shouldn't be hugging them. It's the people business. It's the toughest business in the world. Even biblically, saying it says teachers will be judged a little bit harsher than the rest of the world. And
Yeah.
that's how it should be, because we are helping to shape the future and the future transitions as well.
Absolutely. And I think maybe we've even shared this, but I also, when you were talking about helping them transition, and understanding the setting, that's also true, I think, when you talk about the layup, right? And so you can correct me if I get this wrong, but there's a layup that you can do in basketball. You take a couple steps, you jump up, and you can push the ball into the basket, and it works very, very effectively if you're at the basket, right? But and that's the schema, that's the schematics of where you are, right? But if you do that same thing and you're in center court, you look like a fool, right? Because there's nothing, I mean, what are you doing, right? People are going to look at you like you're nuts. Well, isn't that the same analogy that works for kids with transitions? If you're doing this transition and you're following this routine, and this is your environment, this is the schema that is surrounding you, this makes perfect sense. However,
By defining what a transition is, which is really closing down one thing and opening up another. And a lot of times, what we don't do is close one thing down, we just open the other, and now all of a sudden, we've got browsers open, and then we wonder why our computers slowed down. Well, that's why. You can't have 74, tabs open or whatever.
is there anything that you'd like to add to this topic of transitions that you think we've missed, or that would be helpful for people who are working with others, whether they're adults? I mean, adults transition at work all the time. So whether you're a supervisor of adults or you're working directly with kids, is there any last word that you'd like to share with them?
Yeah, I just think, I'm a process guy, I'm a systems guy, and I think that the way that I look at it is I'm going to play king and queen of the world, right? And that's just saying, okay, what do I think it's going to take for this transition to go well? But I'm just doing that in my own head. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to state the objective. And I'm going to say, hey, we're going to be transitioning from math to PE. And then I'm going to ask them, the third step is I'm going to ask them, what do you guys think is critically important to make sure that that works out? And so let's say I had 10 items and they come up with 1 through 5, and then they do 7. Well, if I think 8 is so critically important, just like you had said earlier, then I'll throw in 8. If I don't, I know Rome's not built overnight. So I'll say, great, can you guys commit to those 7? And they say yes. And I say, great, then let's go for it. And then we'll check in. That's when we can do the rating system or whatever of how did you do. And if they are just not great at it, I say, let's go re-practice that, right? If you think about like these professional athletes, they're shooting a million times, right? To build that habit, to build that routine, to build that, making sure that that elbow's in and that they're going to end with the hand in the cookie jar every single time, right? All of these different things. And then that's what we're doing is, and then the ultimate psychology there is, where's the monkey? It's on them, right? I stated the objective because you can't just go in there and go, like I said last week, okay, just go into the candy store and do whatever you want. So I'm giving them the parameters. Here's the objective. And then they come up with the ideas and now they own them. Whether it works or whether it doesn't go so good, it's on them. And then we can discuss and talk and they can decide, oh, that wasn't a good idea. I want to do this next time. Okay, great. Let's try that. And after a week or two, it's going to be like clockwork.
I agree. And you know, one of the things we do talk about is criteria for success, which is what you're talking about. How will this transition be successful? How will we know it? Well, we'll do this, 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 and this. And if it doesn't work, then you tweak, you adjust, you make it different, and you pivot, right? Because everything that you do doesn't work the first time, and that's okay. And I like the idea of practicing so that you have an opportunity to get better, right? And so I think sometimes it is go slow to go fast, which sometimes is really hard for us as adults to do. So to all of you who have joined us for this hour, thank you so much. We appreciate it. We hope that you found this conversation about transitions useful and you realize that you transition many, many times every day, and that you also have the opportunity to help kids learn this really valuable lesson about transitioning personally and in a small group and in a large group so that they can be successful. So thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next week, same bat time, same bat channel. In other words, we're going to be right here